Welcome back, everybody. I think now it's time for you to learn the purl stitch. The purl stitch is often referred to as the backwards knit stitch, and you'll understand why soon enough. Once again, we're going to be using gold and red needles to symbolize the switching old and new needles and old and new stitches. I'm going to introduce to you a new concept today called the right side and the wrong side. Just for today, we'll make the right side where the tail of this work is on the right side. And we're going to teach you how to knit the stockinette stitch. The stockinette stitch is essentially alternating rows of purls and knits. First, I'm going to knit this row just as a review. Now, as you can see, we're kind of making the old stitch into a V shape. And on the back is the knitting bump, on what we are referring to as the wrong side. Now I'm going to knit the rest of this row, pushing the knitting bumps to the back continuously. Alright, we're done with the first row. Now, as you can see the V's a little more clearly. You can see them right here. And you can see the knitting bumps on the back. Now, I'm going to turn it around again. And here's our old needle and our new needle. However, the purl stitch is very special. Instead of starting with our yarn in the back, behind everything, we're putting it in the front of our work. Ta-da! Doesn't seem so different, but I found it a challenge to wrap my head around. Now I'm going to take the new needle and stick it in from the back of the old stitch into the front of the old stitch, and I'm going to once again wrap around counterclockwise the new stitch, but instead of pulling it from behind to the front, I'll pull it from the front to the back. Ta-da! Now you can see the knitting bumps in the front immediately because we are pulling the old stitch over the new stitch, like this, kind of like you were putting on a sweater. I'm going to do that a few more times just so you're clear. So once again, new needle from the back into the front of the old stitch, take the yarn, create the new stitch by wrapping counterclockwise again, but this time it's all in front of the work, and then pull from front to behind and slip it off. Ta-da! Gonna do that again very slowly. As you can tell, we're still on the wrong side of the work. You can see the knitting bumps not only from this last row but also the previous row. That is because with the knit stitch, knitting will pull the bumps to the back, whereas with the purl stitch, it'll pull it to the front. So we have 2 rows of bumps in a row. Now if that's the case, what's going to be on the other side? If we're turning it to the right side, it's 2 rows of loops. See? 2 straight rows of loops, or V's. Now, as I said before, the stockinette stitch is really an alternating pattern of knit rows and purled rows. So once again, I'm going to knit this row. And as you can note, the knitting is in back of the work, and because we're pulling the stitches from behind to the front, we're moving the knitting bumps to the back, meaning in the right side of the work we can only see the loops. I'm going to zoom in on the loops. Aren't they nice? A lot of people feel that the loops are aesthetically more pleasing than just a long series of plain knit stitches. A little fun fact about me: when I was learning the purl stitch, although I figure out how to purl, I didn't understand that you had to combine knitting and purling to create this stockinette pattern. I just thought that by purling again and again you would get it, but that doesn't make any sense. And I didn't realize that because none of the resources online explained it to me. Really, if you're purling and continuously pushing stitches to the front, but then moving the front to the back for the next row, you're just going to get the bumps lined up against each other, and really, you can't see the loops. What you have to do is create a pattern that is continuously moving the stitches that you want to one side. The stockinette stitch does this first on the right side by moving the stitches to the back, and then on the wrong side using the purl to move the stitches to the front, thus preserving the V's or loops and the bumps. Alright, so a couple minutes later and I've done a few more rows. So in case you're having trouble seeing the full effect of the stockinette stitch before, here it is now. As you can tell, the bottom half is all knit stitches and the top half is alternating knits and purls. Another benefit of starting off with 2 different colored needles is that you come to associate a color with a stitch. When I'm knitting with the right needle as the new stitch, I always use the knit stitch to push things to the back so I can see the loops. However, when I'm using the gold needle as the new stitch, I see that all the knitting bumps are in front of me, so I want to push all of them to the front and purl. Now obviously, you won't always want to use 2 mismatched needles in your work, and you might not always have that option. Ultimately, this is what all knitting is, even the most complicated patterns. They're all variations of the knit stitch and the purl stitch. Visually, it's inaccurate, but I like to associate the loops with the knit stitch and the bumps with the purl stitch. The loops because when I'm knitting, I will see these loops because the knit stitch pushes the bumps to the back, and purling I like to associate with the bumps because I'm pushing the bumps to the front where I can see them. A lot of repeating patterns from here on out will be referred to as the stitch, such as the stockinette stitch. There's also the box stitch, the rib stitch, and so on, and once again, they are all combinations of the knit and purl stitch. 2 basic techniques that make the foundation of all of knitting.